on in. Settle back. It's curtain time at the Story Lane Theater. You've never seen a stage like this one. Anything can happen here. Today we're going to hear about a legend, the legend of John Henry. The story of this steel-driving man has been passed down mainly in a song. The song has been around for over 100 years, and it changes a little every time someone new sings it, but it's always about a remarkably strong man and his race against a machine. We're going to hear two versions of that song today, performed in the style of music known as the blues. One from a musician named B.B. King, and the other from the man who's playing the music you're hearing right now, Taj Mahal. Taj has been playing the blues for practically his whole life. Let's hear what he has to say about his music and the legend of John Henry.
The blues can express many moods and feelings. 360 degrees of emotion. Joy, sadness, fun, laughter, all kinds of things. It has the ability to take whatever life is and present it in a way that you hear it right away. There are some songs that came out of railroad work. That was a really hard job. You think about laying railroad track and ties, and that they used to do all that work by hand. That was all done by hand. Chanting rhythmically while you're doing that kind of work makes it go easier. The sun was hot, the work had to be done, and the freedom that they had was to rhythmically deal with this. That's something that they could do. So they sang their songs and the work goes much easier. The first time I heard the legend of John Henry, I cannot even recall. It was so long ago that I know it was before the age of 5. That much I can tell you. But it came out of the folklore that was always being brought down the line. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to play that song. It's a very important song. When John Henry was a baby boy, sitting on his daddy's knee, Daddy said, son, 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 keep on looking to the sun. Don't you ever take no pattern after me. Don't you never take no pattern after me. John Henry actually takes an incident that happened out near Beckley, West Virginia, around the building of the Big Bend Tunnel for the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad. There was a race to see whether the man would hold as good as the steam drill. John Henry said to the steam drill, steam drill, I'm gonna run you down. I'm hitting 9 pounds from my hips on down. And the more you go, watch me throw down. The more watch me throw it down. John Henry is the struggle between humans and the machine. There's always the desire to show that the human touch is more important than the mechanical touch. John Henry hammered in the mountains till the head of his hammer caught fire. I've been picking my boy, won't you lay him down again? I want one cool drink of water before I die. One cool drink of water before I die. One cool drink of water before I die. Legends have started out because of people's desire to have hope. It usually is some sort of unique incident that happens, and then a lot of different people put their own little spin on it. In my opinion, what John Henry symbolized was endurance and strength to really come up against a very formidable foe and triumph.
Thanks, Taj, for playing your version of the song. And now, let's get ready to see the legend of John Henry. Be sure to listen for another version of the John Henry song by B.B. King, and you'll see how the legend of John Henry keeps right on growing all the time.
In my hand, and if one day I find myself out all alone, I'll hammer till the evening and pound my way back home, and pound my way back home, and pound my way back home, and pound my way back home.
Way back a good while ago, when the United States was still busting out of his baby shoes, there lived a man named John Henry. Now, ain't no history book's gonna tell you about John Henry, 'cause he was just too plain big for them books. But when it comes right down to it, John Henry was the mightiest, doggone greatest nation builder this country's ever seen. Oh, sure, you had your Washingtons and your Jeffersons, but they was just presidents. You see, John Henry was a steel-driving man. Now, some folks think they know all about John Henry and his famous race with the steam drill, but most of them don't even know a steel steak from a beefsteak. See, I was around when John Henry was king of the railroad camps, and I remember him just as clear as the Kentucky moon on an August night. So y'all listen up, because I'm going to tell you the guaranteed, gold-plated, 99.9% truth about John Henry. Now, it all started in a little village way down south in cotton country. Mama and Papa Henry were just your ordinary sharecropping folk, no different from the rest of us. They lived in a log cabin, and one springtime morning, Mama Henry gave birth to a baby named John Henry. Now, folks knew right away there was something different about John Henry. Shoot, ain't no ordinary baby born with a hammer in his hand, and ain't no ordinary baby weighs over 45 pounds. But John Henry did, and that wasn't even the strange part. Not 2 hours out of his mama's belly, John Henry ups and starts talking. "Oh, if it ain't too much trouble," he said, "just as sweet as sugar. Would y'all mind bringing me something to eat? I'm mighty hungry." Now, nobody ever heard a 2-hour-old baby talking before. But after a while, Mama Henry asked John Henry what he wanted to eat. "Well," he said, figuring and calculating on his fingers, "I'd like 8 ham bones, 2 pots of black-eyed peas, a 3-foot slab of cornbread, 3 kettles of cabbage soup, a big heap of collard greens, 4 pans of peach cobbler, and 2 pots of coffee, strong coffee. That is, if it ain't too much bother." So John Henry ate pretty good. And he was so tuckered out when he was done, by Jiminy, he slept for a solid week. Well, the years went by, and John Henry grew bigger. At 2 years old, he was juggling chickens for fun. At 6, he was wrestling with razorback hogs and juggling chickens at the same time. And at 10, John Henry was already a teenager. But there was nothing in the whole wide world that John Henry liked more than swinging a hammer and singing a song. He'd hammer hickory sticks. He'd hammer fence posts, cooking pots, brass nails, boulders, anything he could get his hands on. He'd pound in the morning, clang in the evening. His arms grew as solid as oak stumps, and his chest busted out bigger than a barrel. Why, he grew so big that one day he couldn't even fit through the front door of his parents' cabin. And that's when John Henry decided it was time to leave home. "Mama," he said one morning, "I'm a man now. I'm a natural man. And I'm gonna find me a job with a hammer in my hand." So John Henry left home, and he walked north through the countryside. And as the sun went down at night, making the whole land light up like fire, he sang a song to himself.
Yeah, my name's John Henry, and I'm a natural man. I was born one morning with a hammer in my hand. And if one day I find myself out all alone, I'll hammer till the evening, pound my way back home, pound my way back home, pound my way back home, pound my way back home.
One afternoon, while he was walking in the lonesome woods, he stumbled across a road of iron rails. Those rails sparkled in the sunshine like silver, and beneath them was freshly cut wood ties, which smelled sweeter than a bag of balsam. And John Henry exclaimed, to no one in particular, "By Jiminy, if this ain't a railroad track, then I'm an ox and a moron both at the same time." Now, John Henry, who was no ox and certainly no moron, was correct in his assessment. He had in fact stumbled onto the great Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad line, which was just being built around that time. The C&O line, as people like to call it, was going to connect up the eastern with the midwestern part of the United States. The railroad cut through some of the deepest, darkest, most howling wilderness of West Virginia, along hills and hollers, up mountains and down valleys, through woods as thick as a cornfield in cutting time. Well, John Henry knew right away he was on to something big. And after a day of following those rails, he reached the top of a rise. And from that rise, he saw where the tracks ended, far in the valley, and a whole assembly of men were living and working. From up there, he could hear the clang and clink of hammers hitting steel stakes. And to John Henry, it was the sound of heaven itself. A beautiful harmony of hammers ringing over the hills like songbirds in early spring. "Now that's a job for me," John Henry yelled, beaming from ear to ear. "A job for a natural man who wants to build this land with a hammer in his hand." With that, John Henry scrambled down that rise as fast as his feet could take him. And when he got to camp, he was amazed. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. There were men from all over the world working together with hammers. There were black men and brown men and red men. There were yellow men and white men too. So when John Henry got to camp, he just pushed his way straight ahead to the end of the line, picked up a 9-pound hammer and started driving steel stakes like it was going out of style. Clang, hitting here. Bang, hitting there. Ding, hitting this one. Dang, hitting that one. Well, after a while, everyone on that line stopped what they was doing and started looking at this rather large, enthusiastic stranger. They saw right away that John Henry was just the naturalest man they had ever laid eyes on. Why, he hammered those stakes so hard that smoke rose from them, and some of them even caught fire. Soon the captain came over and started watching John Henry too. "Son," he said after a while, "you the darn crackest steel-driving man I ever seen. Name's Captain Tom, and I'd be honored if you'd work for me starting tomorrow." John Henry put down his hammer and smiled. "Pleased to meet you, Captain Tom. My whole life I've been waiting to build this land with a hammer in my hand, and I don't aim on waiting any longer. If it ain't any bother to y'all, I'm gonna start right now." And with that, John Henry set straight to work on the C&O Railroad. Now, driving steel ain't no 4th of July picnic. Usually it takes a team of 3 men, all working in rhythm, to knock one stake into the ground. And usually there's a man called a shaker who has to hold the steel in place while it's being hit. But John Henry had his own way of doing things. First, he had the blacksmith build him 2 40-pound hammers, which most men couldn't even lift. He'd hold one hammer in each hand like a pair of drumsticks. Then he'd take a steel stake, hurl it into the ground as if he was playing darts, and smash it down with one hammer and then the next. Bing, bang, boom. The whole time just singing a hammer song. The fact is, John Henry couldn't really hammer without singing, and vice versa. 'Cause for him, singing and hammering was just different parts of the same thing.
Yeah, my name's John Henry. I'm a natural man. Well, I was born one morning with a hammer in my hand. And if one day I find myself out all alone, I'll hammer till the evening and found my way back home. And found my way back home. Found my way back home.
Well, John Henry got so good at driving that steel he could do the work of 10 men in half the time. He could hammer upside down, underarm, overarm, backhanded, blindfolded, sideways, frontways, and a few ways so complicated they can't even be explained without an acre of blackboards and a barrel of chalk. Heck, he worked so fast that he needed his own waterman just to keep his hammers from catching fire. And when he drove steel, people 300 miles away could feel the earth jump. So John Henry worked that line, and he was happy as a boll weevil in a cotton ball. Sometimes he'd ramble around the country months at a time, laying line all over the land. Why, John Henry laid more line than any other man living or dead, before or since. Well, one day in late summer, when John Henry was back working the C&O line right around Big Bend Mountain, a stranger came into camp. Now, this stranger was all duded up and dressed to the nines, a real city slicker who worked for none other than Cornelius Vanderbilt. Now, this fella brought with him a big contraption which nobody had ever seen before. It was made of 6 kinds of steel and covered with dials and gauges and drills and hammers. This here machine is called a steam drill, the stranger explained when he got into camp. And it can drive steel 5 times faster than any man. Now, this fella wasn't making no friends by saying a thing like that, 'cause nobody likes a piece of metal can do their job. But them folks got to scratching their heads, looking over that machine and figuring that maybe, just maybe, it could. So them folks grew mighty quiet about the mouth. And just when things got so silent you could hear a ladybug yawn, well, John Henry stepped forward. "I'll die with a hammer in my hand before any machine beats a man," he said it straight out, with no bragging or sassing. Then he went on. "A man's a man, and there ain't no machine that's better than a man. A man's got a heart inside, a big old beating heart, but a machine ain't got nothing but a soul of cold steel." On hearing this, those folks nodded in agreement, but the stranger smiled, and there was a glint of gold in his eye. "Does that mean you're willing to compete with my steam drill to see who can drive more steel?" he asked. "If that's what I gotta do," John Henry said, "I'll do it, 'cause I'm a natural man." And so the contest was set for 2 days away at 9 o'clock in the morning. John Henry versus the steam drill. And won't you know it, 2 days later, just as the sun was stealing up over Big Bend Mountain, folks came from all over the land, came streaming into that valley. They came by foot, by horse, by buggy, and by locomotive train itself, just to see John Henry whoop up on that steam drill. At 9 o'clock, the crowd fell silent, and the official man shot his gun into the air. The contest had begun. On the right side was the steam drill, and that steam drill straightaway lurched into the lead, a gurgling and a spouting and making metal racket to high heaven. There were fellas shoveling pine knots in his belly for fuel, and that machine was drilling holes into the ground just as fast as buckshot. On the left side was John Henry, sweating and flexing and letting loose with full John Henry force. Clang, hitting here, bang, hitting there. The whole time singing his song while his hammers kept a backbeat. So, in this way, the hours went by. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3, 4, 5 hours. The sun climbed high up in the sky, then rolled back down. And John Henry's hammers got so hot, they were just glowing like the sun itself. But that steam drill was still ahead. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, John Henry and the steam drill were neck and neck. They reached the opening of Big Bend Tunnel and went right inside. Folks waited outside where they could hear the contest going on. They heard the whine and screech of that steam drill, spitting and screaming like an alley cat. And over that awful sound, they could hear John Henry's voice, sweeter than a summer's corn, echoing out of that tunnel.
Yeah, my name's John Henry. I'm born a natural man. I was born in the morning with a hammer in my hand. With these hammers of steel, I can whip any steam drill.
At 5 o'clock, just as the day was cooling down, there was another gunshot, and the race had ended. All was silent in Big Bend Tunnel. Outside, a hush came over the crowds, and that valley was as quiet as a juke joint on Sunday morning. After a few minutes, the official man came walking out of the tunnel. He strode right down those tracks, held his hand up high, and yelled out, "John Henry drove more steel than the steam drill. John Henry beat the machine." And boy, you should have heard that crowd explode into yipping and yelling and screaming, just as pleased as plum pudding that John Henry had won. Folks was a-celebrating and folks was a-dancing. Then John Henry came out of that tunnel, covered from head to toe in coal dust, coughing and holding his gut as if something had bust inside. So the crowds hushed again, and John Henry laid himself on the ground. "You have to forgive me, folks," he said, "but I had to beat that steam drill. And I did. And now I'm going to my grave with a hammer in my hand." Well, nobody could believe what they was hearing. Why, John Henry just whooped that steam drill. But as he was laying there with his hammers crossed over his heart and his face covered in coal dust, John Henry upped and died. Up and died right there in front of all those folks as the sun was going down for the night. Now, some folks say John Henry died of a broken heart because he knew the steam drill one day would take the place of every steel-driving man in the land. Others say he died of breathing too much coal dust. it turns out John Henry didn't really die at all. He just sort of went on a long, deep sleep from which he hasn't yet woken. And if you don't believe me, shoot, you can see for yourself. Now all you gotta do is take a train, any train, out into the empty countryside. In the evening or late at night, when the moon is big and fat and the wind is just right, you listen to the wheels chugging on the track. Back and forth, like the beat of a drum. And by Jiminy, that's the sound of John Henry pounding steel stakes till kingdom come. Yes, sirree, folks. That's the sound of John Henry, hammering his way back home.